Lord, help us to see you more clearly, to love you more dearly, to follow you more nearly, day by day. Amen. Please sit. On May 9th, 1945, a newly sworn-in President Harry Truman gathered a group of counselors and advisors to carry on the weighty discussion of whether or not to drop atomic bombs on Japan in order to attempt to end World War II. By June 1st, President Truman had made the decision that in order to force Japan to capitulate, they would, in fact, resort to dropping these atomic bombs. In considering the targets, they looked at cities that met a couple of pieces of criteria. One was cities that had contributed in some way to the war effort. Maybe they were manufacturing munitions at those places. The second criteria was looking at cities that had already not been extensively bombed during the war, were still relatively intact. On August 6th, they made the decision to drop a bomb on Hiroshima, killing well more than 100,000 people. The second site they chose was Kokura, but on August 9th, 3 days later, because of inclement weather over Kokura, the planes flew over Nagasaki and dropped the bomb on them instead, killing well more than 100,000 people there too. All told, hundreds of thousands of lives were lost between those in the moment and those in the days and months, years to come. And the war ended. Was it the right thing to do? Was it the right decision? It's something we will, as human beings, no doubt be debating for the rest of our days. You could certainly see, on the one hand, the decision not to drop those bombs that could have spared hundreds of thousands of lives, many of whom were civilians who had no stake and no say in this war. Could have spared them. On the other hand, Commander Mitsuo Fuchida, the commander who had led the bombing of Pearl Harbor, actually said later, dropping the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki was the right call. Commander Fuchida had said that were the United States to attempt a land invasion to end the war, the people of Japan were well prepared. Men, farmers, factory workers, women, children were all ready to arm themselves and fight to the death. And it would have resulted in millions upon millions of lost lives. And so Commander Fuchida made the argument that dropping those atomic bombs actually saved lives, as hard as that might be to grasp. Was that the right call? It was certainly one of the most weighty calls President Truman would ever have to make, all those people in the room would ever have to make. And at the end, they don't get the simple answer to be able to look back and say, yes or no, we did the right thing, the good thing. But that decision would change the course of humanity for the rest of our days. Another decision that changed the course of Christianity for the rest of our days, for the rest of all of us gathered here, was Jesus deciding whether or not to heal on the Sabbath. And it would be really easy to dismiss that because we know what decision he made. And of course, if Jesus did it, it must have been the right decision. But let's not forget the weightiness of that moment. One of the most sacred and important laws was to rest on the Sabbath. The prophet Isaiah, we just heard, made it very clear. To honor the Sabbath was one of the most important things a person of faith could do. And Jesus was looking in this moment and thinking about transgressing that most sacred law. It's easy for us, in retrospect, to look back and say, oh, well, Jesus was always about following the spirit of the law, not the strict letter of the law. But we also know this is the same Jesus who made it very clear. He did not come to abolish the law. He came to fulfill it. And in some ways, this is the antithesis of fulfilling it by one sense. So Jesus has a weighty decision to make. And we know that when he breaks the Sabbath, we know that those around him understood how weighty of a decision that was, because it outraged them, protests. So if Jesus was going to break among these most sacred, most important of laws, he must have had a very good reason, a compelling reason. And he did. Because while we know that the first commandment is to love your God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your strength, with all your soul, we know that second commandment is to love your neighbor as yourself. You see, quite often the trials that face us are not between a clear-cut right answer and wrong answer. Do the good thing, not the bad thing, which would make all of our lives easy. Jesus is faced with the conundrum of which of these two greatest commandments am I going to choose to break in this moment? Am I going to spare these hundreds of thousands of people over here at the cost of their lives? Am I going to spare these hundreds of thousands of people over here at the cost of their lives? How to decide? When you're not just arguing between what is clearly good and what is clearly bad, but between goods in conflict. Now, when I was in seminary, I know many of you have heard me already make a plug for Dr. Timothy Sedgwick, was my Christian ethics teacher when I was in seminary. And he did not invent this idea, but he was the one who introduced it to me, that ultimately the idea of being an ethical Christian in this world is not fundamentally about going out and doing the right thing and not the wrong thing. Most often it's about trying to figure out how can we choose which of the right things we will do in an ethical way. He said there's some criteria that help support being an ethical Christian in this complex world. The criteria that he, as he told me, again, didn't invent them, but was the one who taught me these criteria. The first is beneficence, the duty to do good, non-maleficence, right, the duty to avoid harm, and autonomy, extending human dignity to a person. And when you're weighing those goods in conflict, how do you decide? We see that's the decision that Jesus is weighing in this moment in this gospel story as he's weighing those goods in conflict. Do I help this person in need, or do I honor my God? Avoiding harm. What's the harm that will be caused by me breaking the Sabbath? Will there be some real harm? I, as Jesus, as the leader of people who are looking to him to decide how to live their lives, is he really going to break the greatest commandment in front of them? What will that teach them? But at the same time, I can't just let this person suffer when I know I can end it. What about the autonomy argument? Is that what helps weigh the scales one way or another? We see this is what Jesus then turns to as his response to the protest, to the Pharisees, maybe to his own disciples, saying, which of you in your own human dignity don't decide in the moment you need to do what's right in this moment? Do we not get to extend this same human dignity to this person, this woman who has been crippled for 18 years? And so as he weighs those goods in conflict, we see as the scales get tipped and Jesus makes his decision. That's the work that is given to us in this world. In a world where we go out there and we are most often, counter to what you may see the pundits argue back and forth, or on the news media, or politicians back and forth, who are going to be very quick to tell you, well, my side's the good side. So the decision is easy, because their side is the bad side. Or if you're with me, you're making the right decision, not the wrong decision. But we know that the reality of our lives is really between being forced in the choice of competing goods. And we know we can lower the taxes on this farmer so that he has a better ability to feed his family, but we know that lowering those taxes are going to prevent this hungry person from being fed. How do you weigh those goods in conflict? And we know that we could create an education program that's going to enrich the lives of these people over here, but we know it's going to come at the cost of these people over here. It's not quite so simple as what's right and what's wrong, but how do we weigh those goods? That is the work you and I are called to do out in this world. And how are we to do that? Well, we see how Jesus does it. Prayerfully, deliberately, and then takes the time to explain to those around him how he chose to weigh those competing goods so that they understand why he's deciding what he's deciding. We try to do that here at St. James. We try to do this in our church. At our feeding ministry is a perfect example of when our city streets found themselves filled with migrants who had been bussed into our city and dropped off with no resources. And we know we have the ability to feed them, but we also have a city of chronically homeless, unhoused Chicagoans that are counting on us for help. And they've been here far longer. But at the same time, these people over here have no one to turn to. No family, no friends, no one to support them. And so how do we choose who to feed? We ask ourselves this question at St. James every day, not because it's easy to know what the right thing to do is, but because we need to always be asking ourselves, how are we making this decision in this moment? In our feeding ministry, we routinely are asking ourselves about the 100, 150 people, between 100 and 150 people we will feed at our meal. And we know we're doing the work of extending them not just food, but human dignity. And we ask ourselves the very real question of knowing that we could probably feed twice as many people if we just did a sacked lunch and just hand you a sack of food and send you on your way. We know we could probably feed 200 to 300 people instead of 100 to 150. But I'll tell you, all of our diners that come to me and they say, when I'm here at this space, my heart is touched that you're not just feeding people, but you've created a space of hospitality where I can feel like a human being. I come and I dine here. You welcome me to your dining room like a guest in your home. And I know that means that we feed fewer, but we're providing that hospitality. And so we are constantly, as people of St. James, weighing those goods in conflict in order to make sure that we are trying to meet the needs of our fellow human beings to the best way that we can. And we should always ask ourselves if we're following it the way Jesus was doing it, prayerfully, deliberately, and with the ability to then go and articulate to explain how we weighed these goods to those around us. So I send you out into this world with my prayers. Because I know I'm not sending you out into a world where it's quite so easy as to just choose right and don't choose wrong. But I know you're going out into a world of complexity where you will be faced with tough choices about how to choose those competing goods. And I pray that what will help you stay the course is remembering how Jesus approached these times, prayerfully, deliberately, and always in community, ready to explain to those around him how I weigh those goods and make the decisions about being the best Christian I can in this moment. Thanks be to God. Amen.